Andrew from SACS, and welcome to video number 5 in our 7 video sequence on performance development, including 360-degree feedback. In the sequence so far, we've been talking about why we do performance development. We talk about why systems don't work. We talk about what does work. And we've talked a lot about goals. In this video, we'll be talking about job definition as goals for performance development. In other words, how do you define a job as a set of goals so that that can be effectively managed in a performance development system? Earlier on, we said that good performance development systems are simple, free-form, with goals at the start and with goal attainment assessed during the course of the entire year. So let's talk about performance development in terms of job definition as goals. Role clarity is 5 to 7 real-world outcomes. Now, what do we mean by real-world outcomes? By the way, this is based on the work of Locke and Latham, two goal theorists, who showed us that if you've got too many goals, you don't pursue any of them. And so we invented this term called real-world outcomes to differentiate markers of success from micro measures like key result areas or KPIs, of which we all know there are millions of those in most organisations. Well, millions is probably a little strong, but there are many. This is an extremely valuable exercise from a workforce planning point of view because many organisations have some kind of a strategy document or a mission, vision, value statement or whatever. But if you create a clarity for your employees that these are measurable outcomes that we need to achieve, things like customer satisfaction and how we're going to measure it. There could be some measure of social change. In other words, if we're a not-for-profit, to what degree will we influence the way that the world deals with a certain issue? Once you've got your organisational real-world outcomes, this allows you to cascade them down into groups, and they then can be cascaded down to goals that need to be achieved, outcomes that need to be achieved at the branch level or the business unit level, whatever you want to call it. And then finally, individual real-world outcomes. Now, the individual real-world outcomes are where you go to an employee and you say, what does success look like in my role? Well, I'll give you an example of what we do here at SACS, because for consultants, there are really 4 areas of success. Area number 1 is happy colleagues, and we put that first because if you don't have happy colleagues, we believe that we as an organisation can't achieve objective number 2, which is about happy customers. And so we measure that by feedback from customers. And that contributes to outcome number 3, which is about commercial outcomes. Each individual needs to achieve certain commercial outcomes. That helps us to achieve our commercial outcomes as an organisation. And 4 is quality. In other words, the work has to be done by individuals who performs that work to a certain quality standard. And the measure there, by the way, is in general ratings of leaders about the quality of work that's undertaken. And we're unashamed about that. We believe that if you can't empower your leaders to make judgments about quality, who will? So those are our 4 markers of success for client-facing staff. Now you can define success in any job by outcomes. And this is a revolution that's taking place across the world of job definition, outcome-based job definition. Now, the reason that this is important is that, in fact, most job definitions don't work. Most job definitions are lists of tasks, and there's strong research evidence that having a list of tasks, firstly, it becomes out of date very quickly because the tasks that were relevant in, let's say, 2018 may be completely irrelevant in 2022, but it's also not very motivating to be held accountable to a set of tasks. Outcomes tend to be more enduring. Things like customer satisfaction, things like productivity, things like the behaviours that you need to exhibit can be much more enduring, and that works better. Now, once you've identified the outcomes that need to be achieved for each job, then there's the question of the competencies that are necessary to achieve those outcomes, and they can be skills, they might be experience or qualifications necessary, and they could be attributes, style, behaviours, approach, or whatever. So this approach is something that's catching on worldwide, and it's something that certainly we do a lot of consulting with our clients to help them switch over to outcome-based job definitions. But the point of it is that you can define an entire job, outcomes and competencies on one A4 page. And that makes it very digestible. But the additional benefit is that the conversations that take place between staff members or in teams or with leaders about what are the outcomes of this job and how do they support the outcomes of the organisation, that creates strategic alignment from bottom to top in the organisation. Really powerful way of doing things. Now, the benefits of these outcomes is once you've worked them out, They can contribute to, for instance, engagement and well-being, because we know that if people are achieving their outcomes, they tend to be more engaged, but also the competencies, the experience, the style, values, the skills, they can contribute to engagement and well-being. If you need to recruit, an outcome-based job definition is incredibly powerful because, for instance, you can write the ad around the outcomes that the job needs to achieve. That's way more attractive. And it also provides you with the opportunity to write good behavioural interview questions. If you want to write behavioural interview questions, figure out what the outcomes are that the job needs to be achieved, and then all you have to do is put the words, please give an example in front of that. So if this job needs to achieve sales growth, please give an example of where you've achieved sales growth in the past. It's a very powerful way of optimizing your recruitment method. Workforce planning. If you need to plan a workforce, this is very powerful because the outcomes that the person needs to achieve relate to the outcomes that the organisation needs to achieve, and that gives rise to an understanding of the competencies. But it's also powerful for performance development. And what it means is that when a person has agreed to a set of outcomes that need to be achieved, then the performance development system can relate to those, and that's what you'll focus on. Has the person achieved their outcomes? And of course that helps with things like succession planning, and it can even be plugged into remuneration reviews. Here's some examples of real-world outcomes. This is a job, a Secretariat officer job. Now, this isn't an imaginary job. This is a job that SACS worked on. And so we were doing a workforce planning project for an organisation. And this organisation was a public sector organisation. And they had enormous difficulty recruiting well to this job called a Secretariat officer. The people that they had hired either didn't work out or they didn't like the job and left. And so we conducted a real-world outcomes analysis of this job. And it was quite illuminating because what we see here is a bunch of outcomes, and I won't drill into those in great detail, but when you look at the measures of success, budgets are met and the CE is satisfied with the smooth running of the office, satisfaction of the CE and other members of the executive, satisfaction of the CE and other members of the executive, satisfaction of the CE and feedback from the minister's office and the minister. What does this tell you? CE, by the way, stands for Chief Executive. What it tells you is that this is a customer satisfaction job. And that, I think, is where they are running into difficulty. They didn't realise that above all else, this job must keep the CE happy. Now, you might argue whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. Well, in fact, in the case of this organisation, it was clearly how things should be. This is a customer satisfaction job. Redefining this job in terms of the outcomes that it needed to achieve had one salutary benefit. The ad could look very differently, and so that meant that they attracted different candidates. But the real measure of success is, last time I talked to this client was about a year ago, and the person who was appointed through this process was still there. She knew what she was letting herself into, and she also wanted to do a job that had that customer satisfaction component to it. So it led to success. So we're going to suggest that job definition can be done by goals, and those goals can be used as the core of your performance development process. Nice link between job definition and performance development. In the next video, we're going to be talking about performance conversations. Performance conversations are often done poorly. Most leaders try to avoid because they're uncomfortable. We'll be suggesting some neuroscience-based techniques to optimize your performance conversations and to make them more effective. Click on the link there in this video to join us.